Even the very worst movies generally have at least one or two meritorious aspects. Perhaps there's a decent performance that stands out from the pack, some effective CGI, or maybe a couple of cool musical selections. But sometimes there's a single scene so creative and clever in both conception and execution that audiences are left to wonder how it found itself in such an otherwise wretched, worthless work of cinema. I'm Gareth from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 ingenious scenes in otherwise terrible movies. Number 10. Liquid Nitrogen Death, Jason X. A shamelessly schlocky sci-fi horror vehicle which sends Jason Voorhees to space, Jason X is outrageously low budget, full of groan-worthy one-liners, irritatingly oversexed characters, and one of the greatest kills in the history of the entire genre. The scene in question is, of course, the unforgettable beat where a seemingly dead Jason is roused from his slumber and makes short work of medical intern Adrienne. Jason doesn't settle for hacking her up with his trusty machete though. He dunks her head into a vat of liquid nitrogen and then smashes her face on the counter, shattering her noggin into thousands of icy, bloody fragments. Its impressively gnarly creativity is matched only by the brilliantly nauseating gore effects. Lovely. Number 9. The Mexican Border, The Day After Tomorrow. The Day After Tomorrow is exactly the lame-brain disaster porn outing everyone expected from Roland Godzilla Emmerich. It is a film filled with wanton stupidity, from the heroes literally fleeing from a frost storm, to the hilarious unnecessary addition of CGI wolves. Because a weather-based apocalypse isn't bad enough, apparently. Yet there's one standout scene in the movie that's been on many people's minds as a result of the wild ride that is 2020. As the US gets locked in the storm's icy grip, news reports show Americans attempting to cross the border into Mexico, only for the Mexican authorities to close the border. Back in 2004, it was certainly an ironic turn of events considering America's aggressive stance on immigration. But in 2020, this took on a whole new meaning when Mexico closed sections of the border to stop Americans crossing over. What may have seemed like on-the-nose, sledgehammer subtle political commentary 15 years ago feels shockingly relevant, even true to life today. Number 8. Superman Stares at the Flash, Justice League. There are few blockbuster movies of recent years more aggressively soulless than Justice League. Say what you want about Batman v Superman, but it at least had a clear vision no matter its flaws. Justice League, on the other hand, was effectively a committee-assembled mess of conflicting tones and ideas. And though the bulk of the movie is both insanely dull and visually hideous, there is a single scene which actually forced even the most jaded DC fans to perk up. The scene in question involves the resurrection of a very pissed off Superman, who upon awaking decides to lash out at his superhero comrades. In a breathtaking moment, Superman single-handedly fends off Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Cyborg, prompting the Flash to intervene with his super speed abilities. In slow motion, we then witness the Man of Steel turning his eye to catch the Flash running towards him, confirming to both the audience and a shocked Flash just how insanely powerful Supes actually is. As much as fans might complain about Joss Whedon's changes to Zack Snyder's original cut of the movie, he at least deserves credit for coming up with the single best moment. Until the Snyder cut comes out at least. Number 7. Steve Buscemi's existential one-liner, Spy Kids 2: The Island of Lost Dreams. Though the second Spy Kids movie was relatively well received by critics at the time of its release, it sure has not aged well. Between its atrocious visual effects, irritatingly hammy acting, and general early 2000s-ness, this is a prototypical example of a sequel which instantly equates bigger with better, when ultimately much of the initial charm is lost. But how about that Steve Buscemi scene, huh? Buscemi makes a brief appearance as crazy scientist Romero, and drops a one-liner so unexpectedly profound it stops the movie dead in its tracks for a good few minutes. Romero asks the titular kids, "Do you think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created here on Earth?" Boom! Almost 20 years later, the one-liner endures as a philosophical quote in its own right, to the extent that even many of the people endlessly reciting it online are shocked to discover it's from Spy Kids 2. Yep. Number 6. The Plane Crash, Knowing. Knowing was one of Nicolas Cage's final major starring blockbusters before he took refuge in the direct-to-VOD dungeon. And it's a mostly inane sci-fi disaster movie in which Cage's professor John Kostler believes that a list of numbers are predicting a future global disaster. Much of the film is a tedious breadcrumb-following exercise, before it concludes with the entire world being annihilated by a colossal solar flare. But only after freaking aliens, or angels, or whatever, show up to rescue enough children to keep the human race going. Right. Outside of all this silliness though, there is one genuinely well-executed scene, and that's the memorable plane crash sequence midway through the movie. Presented in a single take, the scene has Kostler witness the plane crash before his very eyes, after which he runs into the wreckage to try and aid the survivors. It's a completely harrowing sequence as Kostler is pretty much helpless while people are burning to death around him, and without any intrusive cuts, it feels that much more intimate and horrifying. Number 5. The Brachiosaurus, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom may well be one of the best directed bad movies ever. The script is dumb enough to suggest it was likely scrawled on a cocktail napkin the night before filming, but at least it's capably helmed by vastly overqualified filmmaker J.A. Bayona. Yet, while the majority of the movie is an awkward collision of overbaked, unearned fan service and sci-fi channel caliber plotting, there is a single scene which manages to tweak viewers' nostalgic receptors in just the right way. As Owen and Claire escape a destroyed Isla Nublar, their final glimpses of Jurassic Park's original Brachiosaurus being consumed by the island's volcanic eruption. It's a terrific moment of artful devastation, albeit one which the rest of the movie pales so wildly in comparison to. Number 4. Alfred's Wise Words, Batman and Robin. No disrespect to the late great Joel Schumacher, but his Batman and Robin is one of the most infamously maligned superhero movies of all time. An unintentional comedy of bad creative choices and bat nipples. But amid all the stamina-sapping campiness and those toe-curlingly awful one-liners from Mr. Freeze, is a genuinely compelling exchange between Bruce Wayne and Alfred. The scene in question sees Bruce asking Alfred if he's become a control freak, to which Alfred drops this wonderfully eloquent monologue. Death and chance stole your parents, but rather than become a victim, you have done everything in your power to control the fates. For what is Batman if not an effort to master the chaos that sweeps our world, an attempt to control death itself? Better still, when Bruce adds that he can't control death, Alfred chillingly retorts, "None of us can." This scene is so wonderfully somber and poetic, it feels like it belongs in one of the Nolan films, rather than this one where it feels entirely out of place. Number 3. The Racist Dies Horribly, The Final Destination. The fourth entry into the Final Destination franchise, lazily entitled The Final Destination, is the worst of the lot for several reasons. Beyond its eyesore-inducingly poor CGI, disappointingly uncreative kills, and general lack of satisfying violence, there's just a single death that manages to be both gnarly and clever. It helps, of course, that this death involves the most detestable character in the entire series, racist tow truck driver Carter Daniels. After making racist remarks to George Lanta, Carter gets drunk and decides to burn a cross on his lawn. However, Death doesn't seem to care much for racists either, as he subtly influences events to have Carter get dragged down the street by his own vehicle, end up set on fire, and eventually blown to pieces by the ensuing explosion just as George steps out of his house. As a deliciously ironic cherry on top, the death scene is set to Why Can't We Be Friends? Glorious. Number 2, for me, it was Tuesday, Street Fighter. 1994's Street Fighter movie may be one of the worst video game adaptations of all time, and that's really saying something. But just about everyone agrees its single saving grace is Raul Julia's swinging for the rafters performance as the villainous M. Bison. Julia, who was suffering from terminal cancer during shooting and picked the role at the behest of his children, does his level best to make the largely insipid dialogue entertaining. This culminates in the now legendary scene where Chun-Li confronts Bison over murdering her father, to which he savagely replies, "For you, the day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday." A line this devastating clearly belonged in a better movie, especially when factoring in how deliciously Julia delivered it. Magnificent. Number 1, The Final Battle, The Twilight Saga: Breaking Dawn Part 2. The final Twilight movie may not quite be the worst of the lot, but it's certainly an exhausting slog of a finale to the overwrought young adult franchise. Even if you can forgive Bella's horrifying CGI baby, it's a flat, unintentionally comical conclusion to a series that clearly didn't need to split its final book into 2 films. But the movie makes one incredibly smart decision, and that's to alter the ending in a clever and creative way. Basically, the book ends in outrageously anticlimactic fashion, as Alice shows the villainous Arrow a premonition of the brutal battle to follow, which in turn prompts Arrow to leave Bella, Edward, and their daughter alone. The movie, however, rightly decides this is simply too boring, and instead offers up a shockingly brutal final battle in which numerous beloved characters are mutilated before our very eyes. Only at the conclusion of the battle is it revealed that, in fact, this is a premonition being shown to Arrow by Alice, and it hasn't actually happened yet. By delivering an action-packed finale without betraying the source material, this is the sort of creative genius that would have been better spent on almost anything else. And that's our list. Know of any other ingenious scenes in otherwise terrible movies? Let us know all about them in the comment section below, and do not forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button. Also, be sure to head on over to whatculture.com and click on some more brilliant articles just like the one this video is based on.